Hi, welcome to Youthwork Podcast. My name's Olly.
And I'm Becky.
We've got a guest with us today. I'll let him introduce himself. He is a legend in the youthwork world and he's from Austria. You might detect the accent, and he's a legend in Austrian youthwork and now here. So tell us, what's your name?
So I don't know about the legend thing, but my name is Sam Haiser. I was born in the very village where Silent Night, Holy Night comes from. So in Oberndorf, Austria, in very rural area. And I've done youth work ever since I was 21, ever since I came to Christ, and worked first in a bit of the party evangelism. So we did parties on the street and really wanted to reach the young people with the gospel, and we call it radical love parties, where we just invited young people to the clubs. But that kind of ministry then developed into a ministry called Shine as part of Agape Austria. I think you have Agape here in the UK, called Campus für Christus there. I started to get a really, really big hunger for discipleship and evangelism. So the ministry was called Shine, and my heart always in youth work was to really empower a new generation of kind of nation changers that would bring the gospel to their schools. So that's a little bit. And now I'm here with Olly in ordination training to be a vicar in the Anglican Church, and headed back to Austria to be a curate there. Yeah.
Amazing. What are you planning to do, like, when you get back to Austria? What's the end goal?
So it's interesting because I'm in conversation with my curacy church right now, and actually I will lead the youth there. And I'm really excited for that, to just, get back and do what I'm really passionate about. So that's great. So that will be one of my roles, but I guess also being involved with house groups, discipleship, and I love evangelism. So I hope alpha courses, that kind of stuff. But in the end, you can ask Olly what we really do. It's a surprise, but I hope we'll build the kingdom. Or
that's the plan. Yeah,
that's the plan. So some context, Olly is going to curacy as well.
Yeah, so we're leaving the training at exactly the same time, and both have the same journey. And you came out of the youth work world to train, just like me.
Yeah.
What made you make that step?
So maybe just to clarify, I was never the only leader in a church in youth work. So I was part of an organization or nonprofit that tried to help youth leaders in churches to really evangelize and do discipleship. So I think that's maybe something that I wish I would have done more. So that's why I think I'm extra excited to just get to do that again, because I really feel that's so important. Can you say the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what brought you out of that world into ordination training?
Yeah, I think that doing that kind of work in an organization like parachurch setting, doing youth work, I really saw how important the role of churches is in, I think, the evangelization of young people in general. Mm-hmm. So I as an evangelist, I love to do like these parties as an organization. So I set up all these evangelistic events. We started, for example, one thing that we did as Shine was to do a living together week, where we had sometimes 50, 60 kids and youth come together. But it wasn't just to have fellowship. We really wanted to train them in reaching their friends in their schools. So what we did is we had like the sermons and messages in the evening. They were trying to empower these young people to be a light in their school. So Matthew 5:14, you are the light of the world. Jesus doesn't say maybe, potentially you're the light of the world. He doesn't say if you haven't been naughty yesterday, you're the light of the world. He just says it as a fact. And we really encouraged these kids and teens and said, you guys carry the light of Jesus into the world. we want to help you. And we really saw crazy things, that was really cool. But what I realized is that I'd love to actually not only try to help churches and youth leaders from the outside, but I really felt the calling to go into the church, so to speak, create a model of how good youth work can be done as well. I realized that often as a parachurch leader of an organization, that I didn't really understand the reality of how youth work works. Sometimes within a church, you have all these complexities. Yeah, there's so much more to it, but that was one reason, really this strong pull of saying, oh, I'd love to see that from within a church.
And how did you get the calling to go into ministry in the first place, to start off in youth work? How has God led you along the way to where you're at now?
Yeah. I think probably my own story of how I encountered Christ was very important. So I grew up, I have a very mixed background. So I grew up Lutheran. My dad would go to the Lutheran church, and I lost my mom when I was 9. She died of MS, and that's why we were moving around a lot. And it seems like every time we moved, we just went to the Lutheran church in town. But we were really struggling sometimes if the priest there wouldn't believe in the resurrection. And my dad was struggling with that. And sometimes we would go then to another church there. And so I always felt like an in-betweener concerning churches. So I was in the Lutheran church, but then we also went to the Mennonite church. And then we moved, and then I was in the Lutheran church. And I loved the priest there. And then the priest just went somewhere else. And he was kind of my hero when I was 11. But the priest after him didn't have that kind of fire foundation of faith. And so we went to the Baptist church. So I grew up Mennonite, Baptist, Lutheran. Then there was this Baptist background. And I kind of had a faith crisis when I was 16, 17, 18. And in the end, I just said, you know what, I'm not interested. I think it was just hypocrisy at its worst that I realized. Actually, my own youth leaders, they were teaching kind of sexual ethics, don't have sex before marriage, that kind of stuff. And then I kind of caught the guy off guard saying something else, and just believing something completely different than he was teaching us. And that broke the way I saw him as a role model. And so I lost faith in the church when I was 18, 19. And I tried out the party lifestyle. So I went out, and everything the church said you shouldn't do, I tried out except drugs. So that was the only thing where I said, that's the stop line. And I got so empty. And after 3 years, because 2 friends of mine reached out to me and loved me, but also asked really hard questions and said, Sam, are you fulfilled? If you would die today, how would you feel about that? And I was like, whoa, back down. And I realized I'm not at peace. I'm lost. So that was when I was 21. So I think because of that point, I've realized like youth work at its worst, hypocritical, with a lot of rules, but no role model, no lived out faith. And then I got saved, I would say, a second time at 21. And I was a total zealot for the kingdom. The exact opposite problem. Wanted to do everything, was really judgmental. So on 2 sides of the spectrum, it couldn't get any worse. Like it sounds bad. It was bad. And so I think because of that fact, because of this story, I was like really passionate. Young people need to encounter the radical holiness and the radical inclusivity of the gospel. Both. They need to see Jesus for who he really is. But I came back to God because someone dared to speak the truth in love. And I think that's not something that we're very good at as a church often, because we are afraid of the truth. We have, cancel culture, and people just can't say the truth anymore. It's too dangerous. And I wish that I had someone who said to me back then, you you are really like on a dangerous path, and who would have, told me the truth when I was 18, love, and would have loved me in truth. And I think I didn't have it. And that was always what drove me, because I realized actually what I had longed for in that time was a spiritual father, someone that I could look at and that would be there for me in my questions, in my wrestling, in my doubts, in my failures, in my figuring it out. I mean, being a teenager is hard. So, and there was no one, because I realized that these guys, my leaders, they had no spiritual fathers and mothers as well. So I think that's what led me in the end to be so passionate about spiritual fatherhood and motherhood, because I feel our generation longs for that deep connection. And my spiritual father once told me, you know what a father is? The one thing, he's always there. He's always there when it matters. He's not always physically there, but you can always call him. He's always there for you. And I would love for the church and for youth leaders to step into that role, because I think it's so necessary. And it's not about the crazy events in the end. It's not about how many people pray a prayer. In the end, it's about, are we as leaders, spiritual mothers and fathers? That's what I'm convinced about. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, totally. Sam, how would you say God has led, moved, or changed you along the way?
Wow. That's a big question. I think I got very frustrated with the church along the way. And I had the sense, while I was still working with Shine, that a lot of youth leaders felt a similar frustration, because youth ministry is often on the fringes, if I dare say that, of church ministry. It's something that is taken for granted, that you just do, that you offer. But I'm convinced it's the central ministry. That's the future of the church. It's the nation changers to come. Every Billy Graham was once a young boy, right? And Ollie Shaw was once a 16-year-old boy. And without someone investing in you, you wouldn't be a vicar today.
No.
And the same for you, Becky. So we've had these heroes of faith that are actually hidden in obscurity, because we don't. You've never told me about this guy that we've not talked. We are friends and we haven't talked about it. So there's these secret heroes. I feel like that's one of the things how God has changed me, is to not primarily seek the big platforms or the success, because I feel like God has shown me, and it was painful to go through that actually the biggest change sometimes happens in the hidden places. No one is looking. The one friend that led me to Christ, I mean, I share his story, but if I wouldn't share his story, that was not from a big stage. And I think I really believe that if you did a survey with youth around the world, why are you a Christian? They wouldn't say, oh, because Billy Graham preached. My goodness, this preacher. And I gave my life to Jesus, and it's only because of him that I'm a Christian now. I don't think that's how it works. Or Becky, when she preached the house down, and then everything fell in place. And now I'm a perfect disciple. But sometimes I feel like that's the story that we tell. Before I met Jesus, everything was so horrible. Then I met Jesus, and now everything is perfect. That's just too simple, and that's not how it works. It's painful, it's hard, it's a long journey, and we need these mothers and fathers. I'm coming back to that idea. And I think that's how God changed me. Are you willing? God has shown me that he himself, for 30 years, was hidden in obscurity. Just a normal guy on a construction site, just working. The king of the universe, hidden in plain sight. And it felt like the Lord just asked me, why do you seek the applause and the pats on the back? Because when I studied the gospel, I realized that Jesus was actually trying to get rid of the crowds instead of trying to pull the crowds. I was shocked to find somewhere in Mark 4, 5, 6, where he's like telling them a parable, and then he says, well, if you get it, you get it. And then he goes. And then his disciples say, well, what the heck did you mean? And then he explains it to them in private. So that sounds to me like he tried to get rid of the crowd.
Yeah.
And so I'm really, really passionate about the hidden work of Christ in the normal things. I love miracles, really do. When I see it, it's amazing. But what about the miracle that happens in the slow, steady, faithful work? How transformative that is, the steady, faithful, normal work. And I feel like often we seek the spectacular and forget about the thing that is, I feel, more powerful.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's easy to be underappreciated in youth work, but that might not necessarily be a bad thing.
I hope that answered the question, but
yeah.
I think that was the hardest lesson to learn. And if I can choose between preach at a big youth event and the same time hang out with 3 to 4 guys and do this every week, if it was one or the other, I'd definitely go for the latter. Because if I asked your young people, what did you preach 3 years ago, they probably wouldn't remember.
They definitely wouldn't remember.
But they think, I remember when we sat in that cafe. I think that's just so powerful.
Yeah. And Sam, have you got any ministry highlights from your journey so far?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to give you a little bit of context. So I think it must have been in 2016, so 9 years ago, almost 10, that this problem, or this, I would say really this pain of spiritual fatherhood got really, like, it became almost overwhelming. I remember as a young Christian, I was 21, 22, 23. And I remember my best friend's dad, I really liked him. He was a really cool guy. And there was just no culture of mentoring in our church. I remember where I really felt like, I should just ask, what are you waiting for, Sam? Just go for it. And it felt like I would ask a girl to go out with me for the first time when I was 15. So my heart was beating. And I was, today's the day. I'm gonna ask him if he's gonna mentor me. And I felt like really, really nervous, and I barely got a word out. I was, Leo, would you mentor me? And he was shocked. It seemed like he had no framework for that, and he was like, wow, I don't know what I could give you. So you see that kind of culture already. He had never had that, and so he didn't feel even like he had nothing to give. But anyways, he said yes, which I loved. But then when we actually met, maybe monthly or something, I realized that he himself had never been spiritually kind of discipled, mentored. His discipleship was going to church. And soon I realized that actually I wanted to learn about evangelism, that I'm actually a bit further along in the journey than he is. And it kind of tripled down, and we didn't meet that often anymore. And that was a painful experience actually for me. I really wanted that role model, but it seemed like there's just no framework in the church for that. And I remember that I prayed and I said, Lord, I need someone. And by that time I had already started an outreach ministry. We had 30 people on the street. I desperately needed someone to teach me how to lead, how to do this. I made so many mistakes. We just went up to people and say, Jesus loves you. Do you want to convert now? I needed guidance, and I needed someone to say, hey man, chill. Just a father. And I felt like my pastor at that time, he didn't have a framework for that either. He was very introverted, amazing teacher on the pulpit. But I felt like when we actually sat down, and to be fair, he met with us, but I just realized this is not really leading. There's no goal behind it. Where are we actually headed for? It just felt like I ask questions, he says something, I ask questions, and I was frustrated. So sorry, I have to tell this story. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Keep going.
So that my ministry highlight makes sense. So my story was over and over again trying to get it invested into by someone, and being shocked that being invested into in the church just means go to church on Sunday, go to youth group. And I think it got a little better. We have this kind of framework for mentoring. For me personally, I remember that I think often missions really helps you. Getting missions into the DNA of a young person really helps. I remember there was this missionary from Romania coming to our church, and he was so passionate. He was stomping around, told us about God's miracles and prayed for healing. And I was like, wow, that's someone who actually sees the Bible in action. I remember, I think a week later, I was like, why didn't I talk to him? I'm so stupid. And I just sent him an email and said, hey, can I come to Romania and spend a week with you, like mission trip? So I just drove down to Romania with a friend first. After that kind of road trip, I dropped him off in Bucharest at the airport and then went to this missionary. And the first thing he did is he sent me to a little village in Romania where no one understood a word of English except the leader. It was just the craziest experience. Feel free to just chip in and say, get to a point or something. But I'm trying to make this as short as possible. So long story short, this guy, this missionary, becomes a role model for me. And I started hungering for revival. We started a prayer group that met on Skype, meeting every day at 5:30 to pray for revival. It transformed my faith to see, as Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. So he never explicitly said it, but it was just normal. And we had these conversations. And I kept coming back to Romania. And I saw really great miracles, like the church of maybe 30 people growing to 150. And like miracles, signs. It totally transformed me. And I just kept in touch with the guy. And we just kept meeting over phone, and I was there every 6 months. And one day he just said, hey, I'm working today, I have meetings, but I want you to sit in. So he had that kind of framework that I can share life. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It was different than church because there was a man that shared life with me.
And mission.
It wasn't just about, this is what I believe, this is what the Bible says. It wasn't a sermon. It felt like someone weaving into a fabric and saying, hey, come, we'll weave it in together. And it felt like something that went much deeper than anything. It was almost Christ being woven into my fabric, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So deep that I've not had that before. And I remember that one day when there was this pastor from somewhere in his denomination. He introduced me to him and said, hey, I want to introduce you. This is Sam. I'm getting emotional as I say this. My spiritual son. And something in me exploded that day because I realized that's what I've been looking for. That's what I wanted the whole time. I have a marvelous father. I really do. So it's not about that I have daddy issues or stuff, just to make that sure. Because I think that's important to say that spiritual motherhood or fatherhood is only for the ones that have like bad physical mothers or fathers. I don't think so. I think every one of us needs someone else than their parents, especially when they're young, to learn. So anyways, that experience made me realize what I've been craving for. And it was a process of 6 to 8 years. And I'm still in touch. He visited me in Oxford last year. He encouraged me actually to become a priest in the Anglican Church. With all my friends in Romania are saying, like, what are you doing with Church Anglican? What are you doing? Be Pentecostal. Be Pentecostal. But I am Pentecostal. My friends, they speak in that accent. So it was really encouraging to see him like encourage me. And I would say I would have never been an evangelist. I would have never been a youth worker. I would have never become a priest without this man. One man. And I will never forget what he has been teaching me. He said, Sam, never underestimate the impact of one life. Mm. Never. Just someone in hiding. And I think my ministry highlight was out of this deep longing for spiritual fatherhood. I said, how can other people experience this? I can't keep this to myself. It's too beautiful. Because if you found the love of your life, how can you stay silent, right? Or in this case, I was like, oh, I need to disciple. And I started to invest one-on-one, and I was really struggling because I felt like it wouldn't go anywhere. And then I was discipled by another man with kind of a program. And I realized, oh, wow, that's helpful that we went about it strategically. But then I realized the fact that it was one-on-one really didn't help that much, because I felt like he was the teacher, I was the student, I had no peers to kind of learn it. And then I looked into the Bible, and also in my experience, because often with Brad, my spiritual dad, I wouldn't be the only one learning. So I wasn't the only spiritual son. He had many. So we were kind of talking, chatting about it. It was never official, but that experience of together learning under a spiritual dad, that transformed everything. So slowly, the idea came of writing a discipleship program that is actually fostering that vision of spiritual fatherhood and motherhood. And it's called Bootcamp. So I've written it in German. It's 4 parts, where each booklet you go through the basics of faith. The first one is Under the Call, Come and See, where they explore like how to read the Bible, how to pray, kingdom-mindedness, kingdom habits. The second one is about sin, because I felt like I was so struggling with the fact that during my holiness movement years, when I was freshly converted, that actually I keep messing up, and I was so ashamed. So teaching about that. And the third one really being, Come and I will make you fishers of men. Putting that missional DNA into them, which I realized normally doesn't happen in just normal church services, because the best you can do is bring a friend, and the pastor will convert them for you. Just bring them, and then the pastor jumps on him and says, "You're mine, I gotcha." And anyway, so I started slowly writing these booklets, but it's not about the content so much. I really tried to. So I had a team at Shine at that point. And we were doing youth evangelism. And I said, guys, we need to be spiritual mothers and fathers. I'm working on this discipleship program. And I was so desperate. Because I thought that we need this, that I basically gave an ultimatum and said, either you're going to be teachers of that program, or you got to go. It was definitely not the right one. Just to show you how desperate I was. Because I thought this is so needed. If they don't see it, I don't see how this is working. Definitely not the right way. So it shows how God can use our failures and everything.
Did anyone leave?
No.
Oh, good.
Surprisingly not, because I think they kind of saw it. But I remember one of my wife was in that team, and one of our best friends together was in that team, and they helped me lead at the time. And they just said, Sam, that was a bit dramatic.
It would have been awkward.
Well, she wasn't my wife at the time. We were just friends and not dating. But so I think my highlight now is it's 9 years later, and trying to foster that what has happened through just spiritual fatherhood, what that can do, that is actually focused on kingdom principles and has a goal, like a vision of connect with God, deal with the sin, learn to evangelize, because every member a missionary. It's clear. The New Testament is clear. And the fourth one is multiply, and for them to become themselves disciples and spiritual fathers. And having seen how this first team in the beginning, how they now live out their faith and what they do, two from the team, they are on the way to become church leaders themselves. They're very young, like in their 20s, but they've been asked by their leaders, hey, can you imagine to take over this church? Which is crazy, I think, but they see so much potential in them. Two other guys, they're probably the craziest evangelists in Austria. They go and hit the streets every week and they just preach the gospel and people are coming to faith. And I'm not saying that because I'm saying, oh, I'm so great. I'm just saying I think spiritual fatherhood and motherhood changes things because it releases the kingdom in them. It's not about me. Seeing now that same in generation after generation, I've just finished part 4 of the boot camp with 3 guys. They're having evangelistic Bible studies with their friends at uni. They themselves, they've started to invest themselves in 14-year-old boys. And then they say, oh, I'm struggling. I want to, seeing their father heart sometimes brings me to tears. There's 20-year-old 3 men, and they really want to kind of bring forth the kingdom in other young people. And seeing that ripple effect, I think right now there's 180 young people across Austria in boot camps. And we just keep seeing that more and more young people start discipling others and start discipling. This is not about numbers, guys. I hope you understand that. This is not about to show, oh, look at the numbers. This is about the kingdom. And that's why I think I really dream of spiritual fatherhood and motherhood, how powerful. And I think Jesus was a spiritual father. Because I believe actually when scholars say that it is pretty likely that his disciples were pretty young, like teenagers even, between 15 and 25. And he wasn't much older than them, but he became their father. And Paul, he said, if you had 100 teachers, but you have not many fathers. It's everywhere in scripture. And how can the church miss it? So that was a long monologue, but I would love to hear a little bit like your thoughts about that or pushbacks. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think it's great. And I think those of us who invest in children and youth, I think probably most people would trade a kind of 100 light commitments where they go off to uni and then don't really care about faith anymore versus 5 or 6 disciples of Jesus whose lives are transformed. Like if that where you want to invest your time, devoting your whole life to a ministry, whether that's through part-time when volunteering or whether you work full-time for a church, I feel like the moments I look back on aren't, there was this time when we did this event and there were loads of people. The moments I look back on with pride are the young people who are going strong with the Lord, whose lives are clearly kind of blessed by him, who've gone through some struggles and come out the other side. And every so often I get like texts and messages from people like that. And it really fills my heart with, oh, wow, despite the mess of things that I did not so well in youth ministry, this is some of the fruit of what God's done. I don't know what you about
Becky, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think the model there is, I think it's heavy on intentionality and consistency. But I feel like sometimes, having done youth work for a long time, you feel like you have to put together a whole program that's all singing, all dancing. And that you're constantly coming up with resources or ideas or activities to fill an hour and a half of a youth club session. But it's often those moments where you have a coffee with a young person that is intentional, but it's not heavy on the prep and the planning. That is more valuable in the life of that young person, and that's also the bit that they remember rather than the fun game and the talk that you delivered. It's that intentionality of investing in their life and them sharing where they're at and having someone listen to that and having someone input into their life. And it's just that it adds a whole another level, doesn't it, of it being personal. Because otherwise, when you're a member of a youth group that's just listening to a talk, or having a discussion as a group. Like those kind of things can be important as well. But I feel like that intentional one-to-one time is actually something that we don't appreciate as much, but actually ends up being the more powerful thing.
And it's a bit more real. Oh, and I do believe in, like, you know, lots of people hearing you talk at the same time, joining in and doing corporate things. Those are all good, but they're not really real life. They're like watching a YouTube video or watching TV or going to like a gig or something. You don't spend most of your time doing those things. You spend most of your time being relatively normal, experiencing, you know, a few people along the way. And actually, I think where faith connects with normal, everyday, lived out life. You know, often you meet Christians who basically they live for the next event and their faith goes like that. But it goes up and down because, I've got to get to the next event and that'll fuel me up and then I can survive for a bit. Whereas actually building something sustainable, which passes you through that time.
It's the tram versus car. Ideally, your faith should be like a tram. And you're always connected. We have a lot of trams in Vienna, so I love trams. But I agree. You mentioned YouTube. And I really think that a preaching heavy kind of discipleship model, or where you think the discipleship is from the talk, or where you try, you have to entertain. Like the bigger the entertainment, the more people. This attractional model underrates the longing that young people have for intentionality, but also being seen. And often, actually, the thing is, if you preach on a Friday at a youth group, reading your Bible transforms your life, and then you just talk about that. The problem is on Monday, the young person sits there and says, I really want to, but then they read the Bible and it's boring.
Or weird. And we have that kind of model. Every time I read my Bible, it needs to be phenomenal. Or every time I pray, it should be phenomenal, because you have these highs and camps. What I've found out is that content is important in the boot camp, but it's more, I think, about values. We need to be aware of what are the values in our society, and what are the values that we as youth leaders want to teach them, or as pastors even. So whereas the world teaches it's about you being fulfilled, and we have our phones and you know, we are getting more and more lonely. There's an epidemic of loneliness. And that's, I think, why it's important that we need this kind of, we are a squad. So if Olly was in my group, and Becky, you would be in my group, and we have a value that is called we are squad. In a world of loneliness, we live out that we are a team. We do nothing by ourselves. And we even teach them evangelism. When they evangelize in their schools, we say, never go out alone. Always do it as a squad. So in a world there's a lot of shame culture, social media, body shaming, all of that. In the world of shame and stress, we need Romans 8 verse 1. For there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So we need the counter values of the kingdom are so going crazy against our culture. And how do we just expect them? We preach it and it's done. That takes years. Actually, I need to sit down with you guys and say, how are you doing? Well, I'm ashamed. I haven't read the Bible. Why do you think that? Why do you think that reading the Bible makes you just before God? It's so deeply ingrained because it's a shame culture. They have 8 hours of screen time or more, 1 hour of youth, 2, then an hour of church. So 3 hours a week against 8 or 10 hours a day from YouTube, social media, Instagram, TikTok. It's an uphill battle. So you need to be really close with them. And another one is a fake world. Like you look on Instagram and say, man, Olly, he's looking good, sharp, well dressed. But I'm not that cool. But often if you've used filters, and in a culture of fake, we need to actually be authentic. So we have a value that is called #NoMasks. So what if you said, well, I feel the exact same when I see you on Instagram, man. You look so good. And we're like, how stupid are we? Yeah.
No masks. Like, be honest about your shame, about your guilt, but you can't do that in a big group. I mean, that would be weird. Oh, by the way, I'm struggling with porn. Or by the way, I'm struggling with this and that sin. It's not the right context.
No.
We need a culture of, in a world of maybes and a world of, maybe, youth tomorrow, maybe I'll come, maybe I won't come. It's very maybe. We need to say, man, #no compromise. Jesus said, your yes is a yes, your no is a no. And actually, when someone doesn't come to the boot camp, if we have 4 kids or youth coming, we are a group. If someone cancels, we cancel the whole meeting. Because we say, every person is so valuable, we need 100%. Everyone needs to be on board. We need everyone. So I think it's very important in our discipleship to push back against these cultural lies. Another one is that you can get everything immediately. Like, order on Amazon today, it's there tomorrow.
Quick fix.
Yeah, and it's kind of that lie. If I just had one encounter with Jesus, then boom, it's done. Easy life. Well, the opposite is true. We need to be in for the long run. How do you teach that with a sermon?
Yeah.
I don't think so. You need to live it. And that's another principle I found is the crazy thing about spiritual fatherhood and motherhood is you need to live what you want to multiply. So it challenges me to live kingdom values. And I realize I don't live no condemnation. I don't live in for the long run. And it actually challenges me as a leader. I can't be lazy. I realized that when I did it with my boys and we did the evangelistic thing, I do every challenge. And when the challenge is, talk to someone about your faith. I'm like, oh no, I thought I'd already done that 4 years ago, Got my tick under the thing. And it's challenging me. No, actually, this friend, call him and try to be there. I think it's a win-win for both sides. And I really feel, how can we win the uphill battle against our culture? I think discipleship and really shoulder to shoulder, being in there together, sharing. Like my guys, they text me, well, I spoke to my friend about Jesus and that happened. And then I say, well, hey, don't be discouraged. We're praying for you. We're praying. We're going through the lows, through the highs. I tell them about my values as well. I'm honest. I mean, there's obviously some things I'm not sharing, but I think just authenticity, no masks. Olly, as great as a leader he is a broken human being. Sam, as a discipleship master, it seems like he is a very broken human being and makes a lot of mistakes, as does Becky. And young people need to realize that, not put us on a pedestal and think like, if I could only be like Olly. I think they want to follow you as you follow Christ even more if you're authentic about your failures.
Yeah, and then it's not a shock.
Yeah.
Then you don't have those things where you're like, oh, wait, but my whole life was built around that this person lives a perfect Christian life.
Yeah.
And now they don't.
Absolutely.
The whole thing's a lie.
And the final thought, I mean, that was just actually a lecture in college about a guy who said in the early Christianity, the frescoes, the first frescoes that we have of Christians in Rome are depictions of Peter with the cock. And I was like, that's absolutely insane. It wasn't Peter the hero, the big pastor. They could have depicted him to walk on water, but it was in his failure. They were encouraged that he was a guy like them, who makes mistakes, who denied the Lord. I love it because I'm like Peter. Like I totally mess up. We all do.
I'm going to make some assumptions about the people listening. My assumption is that the people listening to this podcast care about children and young people, are busy, and either are doing youth and children's ministry in a voluntary capacity, or they might be doing it full time. But we all know it's a busy role. There's always more and more and more. If people are inspired by this, can they look at the boot camp resources? The assumption is that most of them don't speak German, but they might.
Oh, it's being translated right
so, now. Yeah, tell us about that.
So the way that we do it in Austria, at least, is we are a bit cheeky, so to speak, because sometimes we treat, especially if we're busy, we're treating resources as the quick fix as youth leaders. So, this new tool that will fix everything in our ministry. And the important thing for the boot camp to understand is it's not a tool, it's a way of life. And the principle behind this is like, you can never multiply what you haven't become. We do that in Austria, but I'm sure we can offer it in the UK as well. We do leaders boot camps where for each part, and there's 4, there's one weekend from Thursday to Sunday where you can experience it yourself. We believe in experiential pedagogy. You need to experience it yourself, even though you have a BA in theology from Oxford, or it doesn't matter. Everyone needs to experience, or if you have a master's or a PhD, it doesn't matter, because we all need to experience this. The way it works is that it's not just a booklet that I give to you. It's actually, you need to experience it first, and then you can pass it on. So if people would be interested, I guess we have to translate this, and we'd have to do some kind of weekend, and people can come, and I think I'm very happy to organize this and just try it out if it works. And I think that's why there's 4 parts. It's not one big thing over 2 weeks, and if it doesn't work, you've wasted your time. It's one weekend for 3.5 days. And if it works, you keep doing it, and then you do part 2. So most people, what they do in Austria, actually, they do part 1. They start a group with 3 to 5 young people. That's what we encourage them. Ideally, a male leader with young men and female leader with young women. And then if it works, and if they see, wow, they want to keep going, then you do part 2 over the weekend. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah,
so
it does.
I think the principle is always, you can only multiply, you can only pass on what you have received. And it's not just, I'm going to read this booklet and it's fixed. So it needs investment. But the thing is, after these 4 weekends, you're prepared, and it's kind of just a way of life. And actually, these weekends are, for me, the craziest weekends ever, because you have youth leaders. And I remember us just during the prayer night sobbing on the floor and just interceding for the youth of Austria and crying out for revival together. And we have friendships as youth leaders in Austria because of this. It's a community. So we have kind of bootcamp communities. Every bootcamp leader, because this is actually, it's a spiritual battle. Like really, really tough to this countercultural kingdom values against the values of this world. We meet once a month normally to just say, how is it going? Pray for each other and see the Lord at work. So it's kind of a way of life that you need to invest in. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And so if people want to know more, I guess they can get in touch through the podcast. You can email Olly. So the other thing is, if you wanted to hear more about it and meet Sam and chat more in person, we're going to try and run a conference at Wycliffe. So we'll host it here. More details can come out on that. But if you're interested in that too, so it'll be like a Saturday. We'll be all together in Wycliffe. Wycliffe will hopefully host us. That's in Oxford. And we're going to just spend some time exploring some youth work stuff together and getting to know each other as people who are kind of interested in investing in young people. Yeah. So more details of that can follow. And if you particularly want to know, then do get in touch through the podcast, email me or Becky, and we can connect you with Sam as well if you want to talk to him.
And you can forget everything if you just keep in mind one thing: spiritual motherhood and fatherhood makes a difference. Just the little things matter. Just disciple like Jesus, invest in a few people, and I think that changes the world.
Nice. Becky, do you have any more questions for Sam? Yeah.
We normally allow the interviewee to ask us something fun or something interesting.
Yeah, it can be silly or deep.
It can be silly or deep. Well, I would just be interested to hear, what is the number one thing that you think changes young people to follow Christ until the end of their life? How do you think, what is the number one thing that all the people that go through your youth work, that they're gonna be running the race until the very end, more on fire, with their walkers in the care home than ever before. What do you think is key for that?
Do you want to go first, Becky?
Shall I go? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, I think I've noticed, I've been involved in youth work for a long time. I think I'd say that faith is not taught, it's caught, which links in with the concepts you've been talking about, Sam. It's not just an idea that someone hears, or they think, oh, this might be good. They see faith alive in somebody, and it's caught. It isn't taught,
like
and
in
that's
between
what,
the lines, kind of.
yeah, like that's what makes it stick. Like they've seen faith alive in somebody, and they've thought, I want some of that. I want some of what they're having. What makes a difference to their life, and it's finding out what that difference is, and that difference is God, that makes that faith stick. I think the second thing, and if I'm allowed to,
Please.
is accountability. I think that makes a huge difference. I think if we don't have somebody that we're accountable to, which again links into the one-to-one kind of principle that you've been talking about, and the fatherhood mother thing, and if we haven't got somebody who is making sure that actually we live out the faith that we say that we believe, then again, it's just words, isn't it? And it's just something that isn't alive. It's a concept.
Yeah.
And, if we haven't got, whether that's like a spiritual father or mother, or whether that's a peer, we all need somebody, I think, who can keep us accountable, who can keep us moving forward in the journey that we have with God. And if we don't have that accountability, it's really easy, isn't it, to just stop, or to fall away, or to not be engaged in it anymore, or to just be stagnant. So yeah, I'd say those two things.
Love that. Yeah. Amazing.
And I think that, and you already really covered it, but the kind of line thing is consistency. For me, I think, so much. In for the long run. So much of, which is a sad thing, and it just happens all the time because of the setup of how the unique way youth work tends to be resourced. Or often people who young people are looking to as spiritual fathers and mothers, they're in and out of their life just by nature of that's how much contact you have with them, or you can only afford to work there for a year or for 2 years, and people get called away and all that kind of stuff. But I think as much as possible, consistency, because day in, day out kind of life, it models that kind of thing. And obviously I'm not totally consistent as a person. I have good days, bad days.
But you're present.
But the presence, consistent presence, knowing that you can always kind of turn to that, is a really good thing to aim for. And I think that's what makes the difference, because we want young people in it for the long haul. And as you were saying, it's not like, that's not a quick thing. And often people's lives are messy, and there'll be times where they want to push the church away, and the church has to maintain itself as being there for them. I've let down lots of people in my life, but being consistent, I think, is an undervalued, and it's boring. Being consistent is like super boring, but it's so valuable, particularly retrospectively.
Absolutely.
So I think that to add to all the ones we've said, I think consistency is really king.
I just wanted to take this opportunity and just thank you guys. You've been serving in youth work. From what I've heard and what I've seen, you guys, you practice what you preach. That ties into what you said, authenticity. Oh, there's a real Christian behind this, and they really love Jesus. And I wanted to thank you guys for just speaking for all the young people that are still going strong in the Lord because of you. Because I think you've actually been a spiritual mother and a spiritual father. I can see that in you, and I thank you with all my heart on behalf of all these young people, because I think we need it more. And may the Lord give us a revolution, a reformation in consistency, accountability, rather caught than taught. Just thank you for all you do. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us. Thank you, everyone who was listening. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, because it helps us out, helps the podcast, helps other people to find it. If you found what Sam has been saying exciting and interesting, I really appreciate that you've been speaking from your heart and from experience and from lived stuff. I know Sam is a great guy. If you want to get in touch with us through all the normal channels. If you can't find anything, you can just email either Olly or Becky at youthworkplus.com. It's dead easy. But yeah, really do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you guys, whether it's struggles or joys or interest to know more.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
See you next time. Bye-bye.